This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
From Philadelphia for Mary and from Scranton to Pittsburgh, it's Behind the Headlines. Hi, I'm Charlie Greenewalt, Senior Fellow of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and I'm joined by my co-host, Maura Donnelly. Maura, welcome back.
Hello, Charlie.
Well, we're entering election season.
We are, definitely.
And things are heating up in Harrisburg. Are we going to have a 100% a full budget soon, Maura?
Oh, if I was a betting woman, I would say no.
Oh, really?
It does not seem to be going in any sort of positive direction still, so we'll see.
I haven't checked out.
But you should ask some experts on that. So
does Hollywood Casino have a line on it? I don't know.
Oh, maybe, because they do want to expand gambling. So you never know. You never know.
That's so true. Well, here to help us sort out events in Harrisburg, we're fortunate enough to have with us today Dave Sanko. Of course, Dave is the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors. Dave, welcome back to the show.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for the invite. Hello, how are you?
Well, it's so nice to have you back. Dave, I have to ask, in this day and age when people seem to be more disgruntled with the federal government, the national government in Washington, D.C., has this attitude trickled down and has it affected local government at all?
I don't think so, because I think the disgruntlement with both Washington and Harrisburg is a result of distance. And while the old saying, absence makes the heart grow fonder, that probably is not true when it comes to your elected officials. That when they are absent from town and away in a town far away governing, the belief and the seemingly belief of the residents is that they've lost touch. They've lost touch with what's going on in their community, with what people can afford, and with what services they're interested in having provided. And I don't think you see that at the local level. At the local level, you know, residents can come to the local meeting and they can find you. They can air their grievances. Their grievances are addressed. It's not you know, they're addressed because it's the right thing to do, because you can't escape it. And I think that's why the disgruntlement is not at the local level. And I think you see that in the electoral process. I mean, we'll see a lot of media coverage about the anger between the parties, both in Washington and in Harrisburg. And at the local level, you really don't see that, because you see community leaders working for the betterment of their communities, and they don't. Perhaps they know, maybe they don't, but they don't drive their decisions on the party label after their name.
You're more likely to run into your local official at the local watering hole or the grocery store, or they're just really in amongst everybody, so they're a little bit more approachable, and
Sure.
You can, as you said, air their grievances or compliment them.
Mm-hmm.
Let's think that happens.
I think there are thank yous that go on as well, but I think you'll hear from local officials all across Pennsylvania the number of times that people show up at a town meeting. Is if there's something big going on, they'll be there. But by and large, people are very happy with their local governments. In fact, Penn State tells us that 2/3 of all the residents have the most trust and confidence in their local government when given a choice between local, state, and federal.
Oh, those are good numbers.
You've contended that this off-year election perhaps is more important than any other one. Clearly, local government is the closest thing that our founding fathers were thinking of when they created this nation. Abraham Lincoln said that it's government by the people, for the people, and if in fact that's true, citizen participation is critical to the success of our government, especially as we go to the polls. Why do you think the off-year election is more critical than ever this time around?
I think, and you're right, nationally, you'll see a lot of media interest in national elections. You'll see a lot of media interest in large statewide elections. You don't see media interest in local elections. And those, I think that at the end of the day, those are the most important, because it is far more likely that a decision made in any township hall or local government building on any day of the week is going to impact any resident in that community sooner and more directly oftentimes than decisions that are made in Washington or Harrisburg.
So what are some of the biggest challenges that the local township officials are facing this year?
Well, I think,
Or in general, yeah.
I think one of the big challenges that local governments face this year and in the last couple of years are unfunded mandates. Rules and regulations that come from Harrisburg or Washington telling you what you have to do, when you have to do it, and in many instances, whether it makes sense for your community or not. Oh, and by the way, figure out how to pay for it too, because we're not going to do that.
Well, that really stinks.
So it makes it difficult, and there are some pretty egregious examples as you go across communities.
Well, we find there have been many instances where townships have risen up here in the Commonwealth, Dave, and they have tried to be creative with ways to use the residents' revenues more wisely and more effectively. Can you share with our viewers some of these experiments that are being conducted now by the various townships to try to make their resources go further?
Sure. I think, at the end of the day, folks in local government start off their budgeting process with what they need to do, not what they necessarily like to do, and then figure out whether you can afford to do that. And sometimes you can in your own community, and sometimes you want to turn to a cooperative venture with a neighboring community. So there are communities who will, one community will buy a lawnmower, and another community will buy a snowplow truck. And then the guy with the lawnmower will cut the grass, and the guy with the snowplow truck will plow the roads in their different communities. But it goes beyond that. I mean, there's a collection of communities in Luzerne County, in the northeastern part of the state, that are collectively banding together to address some of the stormwater mandates from the EPA. In the Center County area, communities are banding together to do a regional recycling solution. In the northwestern part of the state, they've banded together and are doing a cooperative emergency health ambulance service. Again, recognizing that everybody can't afford to do everything. In Beaver County, the communities have banded together and put together a health insurance cooperative for municipal employees. So there are examples in all corners of the Commonwealth.
Well, you just mentioned their budget process. How does the local government budget process differ, or how is it similar to what we're going through in the state level at this point?
Well, there's one really big compelling difference, and the local government budget has to be passed by December 31st of each year, and you don't have an option to not do that.
Really?
You can't be late. If you don't do it on January 1st, there is no authority to spend. Everything shuts down. Nothing's going to happen. There are no roads getting plowed. There may not be trash collected. There's a whole series of things that are just going to stop. So people have to make it work. Another big difference is that municipal governments will start off their budgeting process by saying, how much money do we have, and then figure out how to spend it. And while I'm sure it's nice to figure out what are all the things we'd like to do, and then pass a spending plan, and then later on figure out how to try to pay for it. I mean, look, I'd like to do that too. I'd like to get to the end of the year with my personal budget and say, I want a new truck. Mm-hmm. But you know what? If I don't have the revenue or the money to afford a new truck, it's nice to want it, but you can't have it. So I think one of the biggest differences between what we see at local government budgeting and state and federal government budgeting is that there is more reality, more common sense, more based on need and less based on wants and desires. And I get that there are, we've struggled with mandates from Washington and Harrisburg. Harrisburg struggles with mandates from Washington. Washington doesn't struggle with mandates from anybody. No. But at the end of the day, the local budgeting process is more attuned to residents. You're not as quick to want to jump up and raise everybody's taxes because, as we said earlier, those folks, they come to your meeting and they're going to be there and they're going to talk to you about it.
How are the local governments impacted now by the budget impasse on the state level?
At the state level, they haven't been impacted by
Okay.
it. I mean, by and large, the
Business as usual.
It's, well,
Yeah.
in part because the state doesn't fund a lot of, there's not a lot of money going to local governments.
Okay.
So when it stops,
Doesn't make
it
any
doesn't
difference.
hurt
Yeah.
because there was, you know,
There aren't any mandates
somebody
coming
said
either.
when you take nothing from nothing, you have nothing.
Right.
Dave, I think we have about 2 minutes left in this segment. I was wondering, of all the statewide associations, yours has an enormous job. How many townships are there?
1,450.
1,450 townships. And how many township supervisors are there then?
Well, at least 3 per, so close to over 5,000.
Over 5,000. And part of the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, part of your mission is to educate all these folks. You have to help them comply with the laws. You have to help them answer to their residents, work with limited budgets. What else does the association do? How can you help? How do you try to help them most effectively?
Sure.
In
Well,
the last few minutes
we're
here?
pleased to try and help those community leaders provide quality government at affordable prices. And the one thing that they start off with that makes the whole learning process a lot easier is common sense, and that they go through that process. We'll do education classes all around the state. We have our annual conference where a whole bunch of folks will come to Hershey as the crown jewel. We've got staff who are available to help share best practices. You know, we don't sit here saying we've got all the answers, but we know where the answers are, and we can share them with them. So sharing what happens in Greene County with the folks in Wayne County, or Crawford County with the folks in Berks County. I mean, there's a lot of solutions out there in different parts of the Commonwealth. We share those between our website, our discussion group, our staff with phone calls, email. We're a magazine we publish monthly.
Which is, the name is?
The Pennsylvania Township News.
If you haven't seen that you're going to take a look at that.
It's a tremendous resource, publishes monthly. Many libraries have it as a resource. And our job is to give those local officials the tools they need to provide affordable, effective service in their communities.
Well, Mara, imagine that. Common sense.
No, that's just crazy.
Mara and I
Crazy talk.
have talked in the past. We think sometimes it seems that there's more common sense at the local level, less at the state level,
Definitely.
very little at the federal level. So you're probably doing a good job, Dave. And we want to thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite.
All right, we'll be right back with the second segment of Behind the Headlines right after this. Stay tuned.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. The Pennsylvania Chamber serves as the frontline advocate for business on Pennsylvania's Capitol Hill by influencing the legislative, regulatory, and judicial branches of state government. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Hi, welcome back to Behind the Headlines. On this segment, Maura and I are joined by Gene Barr, who is the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. Welcome, Gene.
Thanks. Great to be here.
It's a interesting time to be together and to talk about state government and state public policy. And quite frankly, as someone who teaches state and local government, my students have a hard time wrapping their head around the fact that we have half a budget. What is the status of the state budget? I understand it's making news now for the BBC and overseas.
Wow. Didn't know it hit over there, but I'm not surprised your students have a hard time wrapping their heads. Those of us in Harrisburg sometimes have a hard time wrapping our heads around this. And I think it continues to evolve. It now looks as if, as we sit here, that perhaps the Senate will go along with some of the House versions, because the House has demonstrated they can get 102 votes, which is that magic number for this. So we may be near an end. Just keep our fingers crossed and see.
Okay.
Since we're only a few months late,
What's the problem? What's going on? Why is it taking this long?
Look, there's a couple of things I believe. First off, the amount of money anticipated to come in the previous budget year didn't come in.
Okay.
We always, as you know, you forecast, and the budget year for your readers, for your listeners, goes from July 1 to June 30. So what happened in the 16-17 budget year, we didn't get enough money, so we're short. As we look forward in the 17-18 budget year, you say, okay, we think revenues are going to be X, but expenditures are going to be Y, so we're short here too. So we're about $2.2 billion short. So what do you do about that? There is not a desire to do what are called broad-based, which are the personal income tax, sales taxes, et cetera. So there's no desire to do that. And unfortunately, we also view some of the other proposals as being broad-based, which is a gross receipts tax on natural gas, electricity, phones, et cetera. Severance tax, which we believe will adversely hurt not just consumers, but will hurt the industry. Here in the Commonwealth, there was a hotel tax proposed, there was a warehouse tax kicked around. So you couldn't get the proverbial 26 in the Senate, 102 in the House, and have the governor sign. So it has been difficult to get to that point. So they were looking around, are there dollars laying in funds around here in Harrisburg that we can cobble together to come up with what we need here? So it has been a difficult process.
And Gene, what did the House find, or what did they think that they found in terms of those funds that are lying about and unused?
Well, there's so many special funds around, and say, okay, well, we think that there's X more in this fund than is anticipated to be needed in the next few years, so we can take that. And then, of course, you get into the argument of, no, we think we might need it, and so forth. So between that, some additional gaming revenues, we're not quite exactly sure what the final borrowing may look like. Between all that, cobbling something together that we think is going to avoid a tax increase. And of course, if there's no tax increase this year, the chances of one next year, an election year, aren't good either. So,
well, there's a lot going on surrounding this. There are injunctions being sought.
Yes.
There is money being borrowed. There's talk of what the long-term implications are going to be. There's been credit downgrades. The sooner the better, probably.
Correct.
But July would have been better than October, November.
Not sooner the better on credit downgrades.
No.
Those are bad. Those are
Sooner
bad.
the
Okay,
better
good.
on passing the budget, because
Yes,
the longer it
completely
goes,
agree.
it actually costs us much more money.
It does. It does have an adverse impact on the consumer. As much as if you as an individual have a bad credit rating, when you go to out to buy a car, you're going to pay more in order to get that loan because you have a bad budget rating. The other thing that I think is important to note is that our expenses have gone up and largely driven by pensions. And while we did get some pension reform earlier this year, it was only future employees that were impacted. So we've got a pension bill that is now roughly 10%, not labor cost. The legacy costs of the pension are 10% of the general fund budget. And our view is, until you do that, you got people who say, well, yeah, it has gone up a lot, but it's going to level off. Well,
Level off at what level?
well, see, that's the problem. It's kind of like, I'm sitting in my house and the water's rising from the flood. Don't worry, it'll level off at the second floor. Well, that doesn't help me, and it's not going to help Pennsylvania
Only if you're on
consumers
the
for a
roof.
long time.
Yeah.
Only if you're on the roof.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about the credit downgrades? How far has our credit been downgraded, and what does that mean to the people of Pennsylvania in terms of additional costs for us?
Well, there could be additional. I forget what the exact rating is, and all of the credit ratings agencies give that. And what happens is the state regularly has to go out and float bonds, et cetera. So because the market now believes Pennsylvania's credit ability to pay is not as good as it was a year, 2 or 3 years ago, they're going to demand more in advance. They're going to demand a higher rate of return, higher interest when the state goes to float those bonds. So who pays the interest? Taxpayers pay the interest.
That's why this is getting so expensive.
And it is getting expensive.
Right.
And again, it's the inability to find a final resolution we've done pension reform for future employees. The Senate in the past has passed a bill that in our view was a really good bill that would address and deliver current savings. So that bill delivered no current savings. The Senate has passed that, but could not get the votes in the House for that. So these are all the things that are combining together to create the financial problems that Pennsylvania has right now. And also due to the fact that, unfortunately, our economy isn't growing to the extent that other states are. So if you can grow your economy, then you get more personal income tax, more corporate net income tax, more sales tax in, and then you can offset that. So we've got a not good situation of higher, rising expenses due to pensions and other things, and unfortunately, economic growth that is not up to what we'd like it to be.
So this governor has been big on the severance tax since he was running for governor.
Now tell the viewers what a severance tax is.
Well, the severance, I'll let Jean talk about it, but it's on the shale and gas industry.
Correct. The extraction
only.
of the natural gas from the ground. That's correct.
And so you, the business community, collectively, have been very successful in not letting that happen. Is it still possible?
Yes, it's still possible.
Yeah.
I mean, because there are still people who want to push it, both certain Republicans in the Southeast, certain Democrats. I think the severance tax issue has been the victim of so much misinformation over this. And we have a tax. It's called an impact fee. If you want to just call it a severance tax, fine. And we continually hear that, oh, geez, well, Pennsylvania is the only state that doesn't have a severance tax. Texas has one. Okay, Texas also has zero corporate net income tax. Ours is 9.99. So when companies look where they're going to invest, they look at the total tax obligation liability that they're going to incur when they locate there. So you have to roll everything in, and unfortunately Pennsylvania's topography is more difficult to deal with than places like Texas, Oklahoma. And our permitting, the Senate, to their credit, acknowledged and put in their severance proposal, which we didn't like. They at least acknowledged permitting is an issue. So if you don't get those worked out, and for those people who say, well, the gas is here, the companies have to, no, they don't have to be here. That investment can go elsewhere. There are opportunities elsewhere in this country and in the world for investment by companies looking for energy development.
Well, Gene, you mentioned the impact fee that the oil companies pay here to the local governments for all the effects of their activity in those regions. In these discussions that are going on about a severance tax, if Pennsylvania would adopt a severance tax, would the impact fees then be phased out?
Well, it's a great question. There are some people who say we should layer it in on top of that. There are others who want to give, and there's various proposals. Some proposals would give credit to the company for whatever impact fee is paid. Some simply lump it on top. There's various permutations of that. But the interesting thing to look at, those dollars go to all 67 counties. And yes, the places where the natural gas drilling is occurring, those areas receive a disproportionate amount of money because the impact is greater there, to be blunt. Sure. So they get more. So if you're going to reorient those dollars, those local communities will not be happy with that either.
Well, I don't want to let you go until we talk about Amazon.
Oh, yeah.
Amazon received 238 bids to move or to put a second headquarters in a location, and Central Pennsylvania was one of them. And yes. I think as a collective group, not just Harrisburg, correct?
Well, there's at least five or six different. I mean, Philadelphia has a couple of proposals, I believe, couple sites. Delaware County, suburb of Philadelphia. I believe that Lehigh Valley put one in. South Central PA put one in, Pittsburgh, and there may be another, and they all went in independently.
So of every list that I see of the potential, the most likely locations, we're not on the list.
It depends which one. I mean, Moody's had us as pretty likely. Depends on which one you look at, and I think it makes sense that Pennsylvania has a decent chance because Amazon put some criteria in. They wanted a metro area of 1 million or more. They wanted a critical mass of higher education facilities that could deliver the kind of people for workforce that Amazon wants. They want mass transit. They want international airport. And Philadelphia, and Pennsylvania has a number of places that can fulfill that. And so I think that we do. Our cost of living is lower here than if you're looking at a Boston, if you're looking at a Washington. I don't know, and look, I honestly don't know whether it's going to be East Coast. My gut feel says they'd want to be on the East Coast, and Amazon has picked Pennsylvania already for some of their warehouses. So does that give us a leg up? I don't know. But we're close to population centers, lower cost of living. We've got tremendous educational institutions in this Commonwealth. We do have a road system, water systems, all of that I believe Amazon would look at favorably. Where we fall out, I don't know.
Well, we'll find out next year.
We will find out next year.
Along with everybody else.
It's 50,000 jobs, about a $5 billion investment, so
it's
you
big.
can understand why people are chasing it.
Right, right.
And that was my question that I had for you, Gene, was based on, there is an Amazon warehouse in central Pennsylvania, just outside of Mechanicsburg,
yes.
A rather large one, and I wondered if that would help, for example, Pennsylvania, Harrisburg's bid for this facility or not.
It certainly could.
Get my stuff faster.
It certainly could. We certainly hope that the fact that they've selected PA in the past might lead them to take it on for their newest additional investment in this Commonwealth.
So other than budget, other than business taxes, other than severance, what else is the chamber working on right now?
Well, I mean, there's a number of things. I mean, one of them was we're trying to adopt some workers' comp reforms, and there was an interesting development. We're trying to put in, not to get it too in the weeds, a formulary that will say for a workers' comp patient, geez, doctor, you're trying to prescribe 90 days of an opiate. We don't think that's required.
Geez, yeah.
And so it's the biggest social issue we face. So we're looking at various ways we can of trying to address this opioid crisis. And it turns out, unfortunately, we've had some opposition to trying to pass that. It has come from certain folks in the legal community. It turns out that, according to a story in the Philadelphia Inquirer, a very detailed story, it's a law firm that owns a pharmacy and then dispenses from there. So very interesting article. So we're having to put up with some opposition on that. But again, we believe this is something that we really need to look at. One, to help control costs for employers, which is important. Get employees back to work quicker. It's better for them and their families the quicker they're back to work. And among other things, to address this opioid crisis that is devastating Pennsylvania and this country.
There's got to be some pain management that can fill in the other 60 days or so.
We believe there is. And look,
Yeah.
the flip side is there are people who have chronic conditions who need to be on it. These are not medicines that need to be completely avoided and banned. There are uses for them. The issue is finding the right use, and prescribing 3 months of opioid out of the box, in our view, is something we need to be extremely cautious about.
Not a good starting point.
Not a good starting point.
What are the biggest issues for the remainder of the year for the chamber, Gene?
Well, certainly finalizing the budget is part of it, making sure that we get this budget done without any tax increases or new taxes that will adversely impact Pennsylvania's competitiveness. Talk a little bit about the workers' comp situation, which does tie into our legal system here in Pennsylvania, and we're part of an effort to try and bring reform to that as well. Chamber continues to work on our workforce efforts, and interestingly, the Amazon situation has helped highlight that to make sure that we can deliver the kind of employees that Amazon or any other employer is looking and needing when they move here. So we have no shortage of issues on our plate moving forward and moving into 18 as well.
Great.
Okay, well,
All right.
we want to thank you for wrapping up, sort of giving us
problem.
a good tour of all the issues that are out there at this point. It's an interesting time in state
Yes.
government, to be sure, isn't it? We're
Yes,
very
it
lucky
is.
to have you with us. We will be back again next week, same time, same place. We hope you'll tune in. Mara and I will see you then.